in a kingdom that was neither too big nor too small, there lived a young princess. This princess was not like your typical princesses. Sure, she had long golden hair, and she wore beautiful gowns that shimmered in the sunlight. But she also had a curious mind and a stubborn streak as wide as the river that ran through the kingdom. She loved adventure, and her favorite pastime was exploring the great, dense forest that bordered the castle grounds. One sunny afternoon, the princess decided to venture further into the forest than she ever had before. She packed a small basket with some bread, cheese, and her favorite strawberry jam, and off she went, skipping through the tall trees, her golden hair bouncing in the breeze. She sang as she went, a merry little tune that made the birds stop and listen. As she wandered deeper into the forest, she came across a sparkling, clear pond. The water was so still it looked like a mirror, reflecting the tall trees and the bright blue sky above. What a perfect place to rest, the princess thought. She sat down by the edge of the pond, dipped her toes into the cool water, and pulled out her basket. Now, this princess had a favorite toy, a golden ball that her father, the king, had given her on her last birthday. It wasn't just any ball, though. It was the most beautiful ball in the entire kingdom, gleaming in the sunlight, and the princess never went anywhere without it. After finishing her snack, she took out her golden ball and began tossing it up into the air, catching it each time with a giggle. But, as luck would have it, one toss went a bit too high, and when the princess reached out to catch it, the ball slipped through her fingers. She watched in horror as her beloved ball bounced once, twice, and then rolled right into the pond with a loud plop. "Oh no!" the princess cried, jumping up and running to the edge of the water. She peered into the pond, but the water was deep, and the ball had sunk right out of sight. "My beautiful ball!" she wailed, tears welling up in her eyes. "What will I do?" Just as she was about to burst into tears, she heard a strange, croaky voice. "Why so sad, princess?" The princess looked around, startled. "Who's there?" she called out. "Down here," the voice croaked again. The princess looked down and saw, sitting on a lily pad right in the middle of the pond, a small green frog. Now, this wasn't just any frog. He was a bit plumper than most frogs, with bright, bulging eyes, and a wide smile that made his cheeks puff out. He was also wearing a tiny, golden crown perched lopsided on his head. "A talking frog?" the princess gasped, her tears forgotten for a moment. "I must be dreaming." But the frog just chuckled. "No dream, princess. I'm as real as that golden ball of yours that just took a dive. Now, what's the matter?" The princess wiped her eyes and sniffled. "It's my golden ball," she said. "It fell into the pond, and I can't get it back." The frog looked thoughtful, or as thoughtful as a frog can look. "I could fetch it for you," he offered, "but I'd need something in return." The princess, desperate to get her ball back, nodded eagerly. "Anything. I'll give you anything you want. My jewels, my crown, even my castle. Just please, get my ball back." The frog chuckled again, a deep, throaty sound. "I don't want your jewels or your crown, and I certainly don't need a castle. What I want is something much simpler." The princess tilted her head, curious. "What is it you want, then?" "I want to be your friend," the frog said, hopping a little closer to the edge of the pond. "I want to sit beside you at the dinner table, eat from your golden plate, and sleep on a pillow in your bed. If you promise me that, I'll dive down and get your ball." The princess thought this over. A frog for a friend? That seemed a bit odd. But she really wanted her ball back. And besides, how hard could it be to be friends with a frog? "All right," she agreed. "I promise." With a satisfied grin, the frog took a deep breath and plunged into the water with a splash. The princess waited anxiously, watching the ripples spread across the pond. After what seemed like forever, the frog reappeared, the golden ball held triumphantly in his mouth. "Here you go," the frog said, spitting the ball onto the grass at the princess's feet. The princess squealed with delight. "Oh, thank you," she cried, scooping up her ball and hugging it tightly. "You're a hero, Mr. Frog." But as she turned to leave, the frog called after her. "Remember your promise, princess." The princess paused. She had almost forgotten about that, but she waved her hand dismissively. "Yes, yes, I remember," she said, and without another word, she hurried back through the forest, her golden ball clutched safely in her hands. That evening, as the sun set and the princess sat down to dinner in the grand dining hall, she suddenly heard a familiar croaking sound outside the door. "Princess, princess, open the door for me." The princess froze. "Oh no," she thought. "It's the frog." She had hoped he wouldn't follow her all the way back to the castle, but here he was, croaking for her to let him in. Her father, the king, looked at her curiously. "Who's that at the door, my dear?" The princess fidgeted in her seat. She didn't really want to explain that she had made a promise to a frog, but she knew she couldn't ignore him either. So, with a sigh, she told the king the whole story. When she finished, the king stroked his beard thoughtfully. "A promise is a promise, my dear," he said gently. "You must keep your word, even to a frog." Reluctantly, the princess got up and opened the door. There sat the frog, looking up at her with his big, hopeful eyes. "Thank you, princess," he croaked, hopping into the hall. The princess led the frog to the table, where he hopped up onto the seat beside her. She pushed her golden plate over to him, and the frog began to eat, making quite a mess with his sticky tongue. The princess wrinkled her nose but said nothing, determined to keep her promise. After dinner, the frog looked up at the princess with a sleepy yawn. "I'm tired now, princess," he said. "Can you carry me to bed?" The princess sighed but picked up the frog carefully. He felt cold and slimy in her hands, and she couldn't help but shiver a little as she carried him up to her room. When they reached her bed, the frog hopped out of her hands and onto the pillow. "Good night, princess," he croaked, closing his eyes. The princess, still a bit unsure about all this, climbed into bed beside him, keeping as much distance as she could. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she had gotten herself into. But soon enough, she drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, something strange happened. As the moonlight streamed through the window, the princess was awakened by a soft glow coming from her pillow. She sat up and rubbed her eyes, and to her amazement, she saw that the frog was no longer there. In his place lay a handsome young prince, with golden hair and kind eyes that sparkled in the moonlight. The princess gasped. "Who are you?" she whispered. The prince smiled. "It's me, the frog," he said. "Or rather, I was the frog. I was cursed by a wicked witch long ago, and the only way to break the spell was to find someone who would be my friend, even when I was a frog. Your kindness has freed me." The princess couldn't believe her ears. "A prince?" she said, staring at him in awe. The prince nodded. "Yes, and I'm forever in your debt. You kept your promise, and in doing so, you broke the curse." The princess smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her heart. She had always thought of herself as brave and adventurous, but she had never imagined that her kindness could have such a powerful effect. "I'm glad I could help," she said softly. The next morning, the prince explained everything to the king, who was just as amazed as the princess had been. The prince and the princess became fast friends, and soon that friendship blossomed into something more. They spent their days exploring the kingdom, going on adventures, and discovering new places together. And, of course, they always made time to visit the pond where the frog prince had first met the princess. They would sit by the water's edge, reminiscing about their first encounter and laughing at how strange it all seemed now. In time, the prince and princess were married in a grand celebration that lasted for days. The entire kingdom rejoiced, for everyone knew the story of the brave princess and the frog who became a prince. And so, the prince and princess lived happily ever after, ruling their kingdom with kindness, courage, and a sense of adventure that never faded. And they always remembered that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the most unexpected and magical outcomes. Thanks for tuning in. For more enlightening content and a detailed summary, visit www.mybooksummary.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. Let's inspire and empower each other. Subscribe to our channel and share our videos with your friends and family.